Aloha, this is Autumn. I already recorded 30 minutes of this video once, but I'm going to try again. I don't know if anyone remembers this particular uh, messy dialogue, which happened well over a year ago. This was a tricky one. Ostensibly, Jordan was supposed to be the main guest, and according to him, Jordan Hall was supposed to be the main guest, and Jordan Hall um, they were supposed to talk about the Trinity. Of course, they didn't really touch on this. Uh, Peterson ended up talking a lot. Vervaeke ended up talking a lot, for which he later apologized. There were a lot of interesting things said, but it never really approached anything like a gestalt in my estimation. It did seem like a missed opportunity. However, there were some things in this conversation that really stuck with me. That I did not grok, and now maybe something like legibility is emerging well over a year later today with what is going on in the hyper conversation and TLC in general, specifically regarding the notion of normativity. Now, this conversation is probably the first time this notion of normativity breached into my consciousness as a point of salience and relevance and thus meaning. I don't think then nor now have I fully grokked what this word actually means. I'm unclear if Vervaeke himself has even grokked it, but there's something emerging here. So I'm going to play what maybe like 10 or 15 minutes of this video. I will interrupt to comment intermittently. It is intermittently. It is a bit of a slog, but there's some real gold in here, and then hopefully we will transition over to a few other more recent conversations that have been going on that will ground this notion of normativity into something just easier and more straightforward. But my only hope with this recording is to help work out my own thoughts. And yes, it would be very nice if something like a sudden shimmering glittering image and gestalt would emerge that will fully enlighten me and you. That is unlikely to happen, but let's begin, shall we?
And superego.
Well, yeah, I tend to have a sadistic superego. So,
Right.
So there's that, and then the other thing you said about self-sacrifice, but you said something that maybe qualified it, because this is a qualification I would make. I think the meta narrative. I'll challenge it. I think the meta narrative isn't self-sacrifice. I think it's I think it's sacrifice in service of getting to what is most real. I think people make all kinds.
Okay. No arguments with that. Okay. I was using self, I would say, in that fractionated hedonistic manner, right? Because if you're trying to organize yourself in relationship to a higher unity, you're sacrificing what's lower to that upward.
I agree, but what I'm getting at is I think what perhaps I guess because we're talking about conscience, and conscience is a normative self-knowing, knowing yourself normatively rather than descriptively, right? That's what conscience.
Conscience is a normative self-knowing. It's a way of knowing yourself normatively rather than descriptively. Okay. What I think this means is that conscience is a way of knowing yourself through, and I'm going to be very tempted to use something like an ethical lens, but it's transcendent is going to be quite explicitly the word we're going to use here, because we're going to distinguish normativity from ethics, but through a transcendent lens of, you might say values, but I think transcendentals is actually proper here, knowing yourself through the lens perspectively of what is beautiful, good, true, etc. We're going to get more into this, deep into this. It can be very confusing, but let's see.
Okay, why normatively?
Because as you said, what you're doing is you're knowing yourself through a normative lens. What is true? What is good?
Oh yeah, okay.
Right. So it's con-science, knowing of yourself, but what you're doing is you're reflecting on yourself through a normative lens.
Okay, so that ties together the psychological and the social, that normative lens.
Right. Let me check if I disagree. I may. I don't think I do, but I want to check. Which is, I'm grounding the notion of conscience at a level that is quite below semantics.
Sure.
It's like the moment when you are playing music and you feel the sour note come, that feeling that you have of a direction towards wrongness is conscience.
Well, this is what I wanted to, I agree. And what I would say there is but that's the normative, that's showing up in perspective taking, right? As opposed to rule following.
Okay, so just to really flesh out this distinction here, Jordan is indicating that conscience is an embodied, alive, aesthetic, sensory faculty by which we come to know ourselves. The aspect of it that is normative is that it is through you know, the normative aspect is that the transcendentals are present in that perspective in the embodied aesthetic of that perspective.
What you're doing is you're doing that, like Jordan P said. I'll have to do Jordan P and Jordan Mace, right? The dance, right? The dance of the perspective taking.
Yep.
So when I mean normative, I don't mean like a Kantian code. I mean the very sort of sets of constraints that you put on yourself so that you shape your behavior according to what you're trying to get at, what is true, what is good, and what is beautiful. That's what I meant by that.
So why normative then rather than ideal?
Because I use ideal in a technical sense, which might be valuable to us. So John Keeks makes a distinction between goals, which are states you can realize, and ideals, which are constraints that you bind yourself to. So, for example, like a clear goal state when I'm thirsty is to drink water.
Nice.
But honesty isn't a state I get to, right? It's a constraint I'm putting on all of my behavior for the rest of my life. So he calls those, he says, and one of the mistakes we can make is we can confuse goals and ideals. Ideals are ways of being, and goals are states that you can get.
An ideal is like a meta goal. Is that a reasonable way? But then where does normative fall into that?
So normative, what normativity is normativity are, use that language, normativity are ideals, ways in which we constrain our behavior so that we can shape it, so that we can get in contact with within and without, with, I would argue, with what is most real. That is Plato's proposal. That's what is ultimately we're driving for. We're trying to, it's a grand act of optimal realization.
Okay. How does
Having normativity is a grand act of optimal realization. It's a mouthful. It might sound like word salad, but I think this is I'm endeavoring to find if this can be expressed more precisely and practically. There's a lot to unpack there. We'll continue.
does that relate? Because the other connotation of normative might be social norms, for example. And I mean, I'm trying to put together the definitions that you laid out. So
yeah, so social norms are supposed to be justified by their appeal to what you might call ethical norms. But
the approximations of the ideal.
Yeah, but I don't like doing that, because normativity for me, ethics is too limited a sense of normativity. It's about the right thing to do. It doesn't cover everything that's covered by trying to make your thoughts as true as possible. Trying to make your experiences as tracking as what is beautiful as possible.
So there's a discussion.
Okay, there's a distinction there between the normative as the ethics is that which change our behavior, and the normative is that which transforms the person. I think if I can put it most, that's my paraphrase.
In Exodus that's relevant to that, I think, maybe. So when just before Moses goes up Mount Sinai to get the 10 Commandments, so he's gathered up a lot of implicit knowledge by that point by serving as judge for like years. Anyways, he leaves, and he leaves Aaron in charge, and Aaron is the political voice of the prophet. And as soon as the transcendent voice, the prophet, disappears, the political voice bows to the whim of the crowd, right? Mm-hmm. And so this is very interesting, because if you have a consensus model of truth, the biblical insistence is that a consensus model of truth will devolve almost instantly into worship of the golden calf, which is kind of like an orgiastic materialism, which strikes me as highly probable, because I don't think there's much difference between an orgiastic materialism and a profound fractionated immaturity.
Oh,
because you agree with that?
Totally.
Okay, and so then the prophetic voice speaks for the ideal that unifies what would otherwise degenerate into orgiastic materialism. It's something like that. And so I think your contention was that normative is insufficient because it doesn't include the vertical.
Ethical isn't sufficient.
Ethic.
I think we can ground it concretely and make it really simple. But just think about an infant that's learning how to pick up a pea. Right? There's a whole complex of feedback loops that are going on, orienting.
Okay, so this little anecdote from Jordan has really stuck with me over the past almost, I don't know, 2 years now. Um, I didn't understand it then. I don't think I understand it now, but I think it's really worth paying attention to.
Towards particular, in this case, goal, right? But the ability to be able to discern what random articulation of neuromuscular activity, coordinating hand, brain, eye, towards an increasing capacity to actually engage in depth perception, everything else,
Right.
produces the desired effect. That extremely complex, subtle, and continuous field of feedback loops and constraints that produces the capacity to move through reality to achieve a goal, that's normative. Right? Governed by the law of continuity, or the infinitesimal, like all the way continuous, like a continuous wave. Ethics is what happens when you endeavor to actually re-articulate that, governed by the law of, let's say, the digital. I can re-articulate semantically ethics. I can take your norms. Your norms have a field effect of continuity. There's something about them which has a, how do you say it right? They're irreducible. You cannot actually break them apart. They're always available to respond to the reality that you're in because they are developed in complex relationship with reality. Ethics takes a snapshot, just like when I'm digitizing a wave in sound. It takes a snapshot of it. It reproduces that in a semantic form that allows us to actually do things like look at it. What we're doing
Okay,
right
so
now.
what would you say, given that definition? So I think I've developed a parallel notion of that conceptual framework. So when ethologists go look at wolf packs, they abstract out regularities of behavior in the wolf pack. So like the hierarchical relationship between wolves and a wolf pack would be a behavioral regularity. It's acted out. And you could say it's as if the wolves are following social rules, but they're not rules, they're patterns. But when you describe them, they're rules.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so is that parallel?
Yes, and this
okay,
maps also to your notion of the prophet and the political. Right? At the political,
Yes.
we are now an aggregate of things that are not actually part of an integrated whole, and
Yes.
therefore are governed by consensus, which is what happens when you try to simulate a whole in an aggregate. In the category of actually being in communion, governed by the prophet, we are in fact a well-integrated whole, and therefore no longer governed by an aggregate or by politics.
Yes. Okay. Yes. That's okay.
Yep.
That's exactly what I think that story indicates.
Yep.
Is that, yeah. And so then that vertical orientation that's symbolized in the Exodus story by Mount Sinai. And then what happens when the commandments are delivered, they're delivered in the context of a much wider range of rules, right? So there's like these macro rules that are really foundational, and then a bunch of micro rules that are more situational. And it's what seems to happen is that the revelation is something, in your language, that would be the translation of the normative to the ethical.
Yes, that's correct.
Right. Yeah. So okay. So you think that?
Yeah.
Did you know of the relationship between that and what happened at Mount Sinai?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we
It's
can
not
add
something that people generally know, so it was worth asking.
No, it's something that might be interesting to add is just to think about the next step vis-a-vis Moses. Because remember, Moses was brought up in and trained in the most executive situation humanity's ever produced. Right? Pharaonic Egypt is an executive, and I'm naming this in terms of commander-in-chief executive.
Yeah.
And so one might imagine that when he finally exits,
He was a slave at the same time because he was Hebrew.
so he has a full understanding.
Yeah.
of that
He's
entire
got the whole
architecture.
hierarchy. Yeah.
That he would naturally default back to an executive form of leadership when he moves into
Right.
being responsible for governing according to these rules. Right? He would move the
Yes.
rules into a legislative function. He would adopt the executive function, but he doesn't do that. He adopts the judge function, right? And the judge operates on by means of norms first, laws second. Even the common law. Like think about how the common law works, right?
Yeah, definitely.
What would a reasonable man do? This is a question that is actually hitting you.
What would a reason?
The whole system.
Well, yeah. And so there's something also that's fascinating about that because if
The judge puts norms first, rules second. What would a reasonable man do in this situation? It is a embodied response, an aesthetic response of the entire system. Okay, it's a crucial distinction. Let's listen maybe 1 or 2 minutes more. We may move on from this.
you two have a dispute that you can't settle, you're lacking a superordinate structure that unites two different narratives, let's say.
Yeah.
And if I impose a narrative structure on you, if it's an imposition, it's going to be
Okay, this is more typical Peterson sermons that many of us are already familiar with. So from there, let's take all that thinky talky, and hopefully land this somewhere slightly more practical. There's a recent conversation with Daniel Gardner and Aspasia, as well as some other friends. Um, this was, I think, about a month ago, and the Daniel says something really interesting here about oh, pause. Says something really interesting about Christianity as a energetic shift. So we'll go here.
I also think there's something about those energetic shifts that create feelings of intimacy. When you have energetic surprises with like your wife or spouses, that also creates a certain of connection and intimacy. I also think it is hard, like that energetic change, which again, I'm certainly channeling Luke's thinking here on Gurdjieff, which I think that focus on energetics and energy is major. I think we have thought about if I just keep referencing Christianity, Christianity has been thought a lot about in terms of ethics and salvation and stuff like that, which of course has truth to it, but there's actually an energetic revelation there. Like there is a mode of being that unleashes the word spirit should be more tied with energy, not just disembodied sort of thing, right? Like spirited, like school spirit. There's an energy, right? And
Religion and theology need to be more about energy. Spirit is energy. School spirit is energizing. It is alivening. It activates behavior. Play a little more.
I think like if you start saying like religious life and theological life are actually tied to unlocking this energy. Oh, well, that's way more interesting than just having the right dogmas and propositions. It's almost like you're capable of like magic tricks and stuff. Yeah, almost like miracles. Oh, interesting. Someone taught on that. So there's something about like, and also too, that energetic shift helps you tell the difference between associate and friend. There are many philosophers, Cicero, Aristotle, Agumba, and others who kind of argue that there's something about quote unquote philosophy that is necessary for friendship. Now, what exactly they mean by that has to be expanded on. But if we think about philosophy as learning how enclosures work, how relationships operate to unleash energy, and you understand friendship in terms of this energetic experience, it starts to become clearer. Otherwise, friendship becomes a hierarchy. Like, oh, I like these people more than these other people, and it's like a power game, and everyone's embarrassed. I don't know. There's a sense in which friendship chooses you because the energy shows up. Like, there's a way in which the friendship, they just are your friends because the energy showed up, right? Like, and that I think, and then you pay attention to that and go in that direction, I think is a really big deal. I think also something coming to mind is like with the Nietzsche, the eternal return. I think there is also something, I guess I'm thinking about healing too. Like there's healing in the sense, there's something about healing with wounds, which is where you actually then retrospectively see the wounds as giving you access to something that otherwise they could not. Like Jesus has the wounds in resurrection. The nails are still, he's still got the wound, right? So there's something about healing that is not the removal of wounds, but a certain retro.
Okay, so there's something about pilgrimage here too. That the reason for the journey changes, the reason for the pilgrimage changes as you're on it. And with this notion of the wounded healer, the meaning of the wounds changes over the I guess from my orthodox perspective, over the course of theosis. Also, this notion of um, friendship and relationship unlocking energy, and that actually being the defining quality or distinction between a friend and an acquaintance is that there's actually some sort of mutually reciprocally opening energetic dance here. So we can talk about that energetic flowiness in both practical real world friendship relationships, spousal relationships, expand that out into, well, the ultimate category would be the theological or religious, and then we'll also get to something later about the environmental expansion of energy. I'll keep playing this clip.
Perspective transformation of your understanding of them. They turn into qualities that make you you. Like, Jesus without the wounds is not Jesus, right? In a certain way. Like the saints without the wounds are not them. Like you without your scars are not you, right? And so the scars actually make you you in the sense of that you that is you is actually energetic, is defined by some sort of energetic change in the ability to also energetically change others, right? So for me, a beautiful sort of idea is that with Nietzsche's eternal return, and if I combine it with Hegel's kind of retrospective time, if you get to the year 99 years old and every moment sucked, there's actually still the possibility in that last moment of something occurring that changes the meaning of all of that suck into something wonderful. And so then suddenly, at the very last moment, you can say, yes, I'd absolutely want to live that life again. That, I think, is actually really important because for me, the eternal return is every single moment I ever done something that I enjoyed, right? No, you will want to relive your life when you have the retrospective experience of it all adding up in a certain sense, or all being part of a story that unlocks it, right? You're not going to, it is not a life where you say, I want to live that forever is not one that never had wounds in it or pain or anything. It's one of which something occurred that had a flip moment, that retrospectively changes what that wound was, that unlocks something, that opened up something, and you'll want to relive that life forever.
So, this is a beautiful, not explication, but just take on the Nietzsche's amour fati, which I think is baggage laden in our culture today. One moment as a sage makes a lifetime of suffering worthwhile. There's something there about emerging out of the ethical frame into the normative, but I think that will be a bit heavy-handed if I try to draw on it too heavily here. Um, so I think this was that video's or that comment by Mr. Gardner is really quite profound, and we will try to tie it back into the normative. I have a little personal anecdote, but before we do that, maybe one more video here between Daniel and his wife talking about creating energetic flow. The navigating the world in a dance-like way where we are pursuing energetic flow is actually um this is an entirely different frame from what we might be calling ethics. So let's actually start this video pretty much right at the beginning. um
Michelle?
Daniel,
OG
OG Rose.
And today, Daniel, what have you been thinking about? What have you been thinking?
Oh, well, last week we kind of ended talking about this question so we were talking about attention and
Yes.
appreciation.
Yes.
And there was this idea of what do you pay attention to? Because if you don't have attention, then something you appreciate can make you kind of stagnant and unchanging, and then it could pass over into otherness and become a bad thing, and you not even notice. So there's this question of what to pay attention to, and we talked a lot about energy, right?
Yeah.
But something we were alluding to is the idea of paying attention to your environments to notice what is throwing off self-forgetfulness, like what is making you become aware. We often talk in OG Rose about environments, spaces, and things like that. I think the relationship, and there's a lot of people online talking about overcoming the subject-object divide. But of course, the question is, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And if there is no subject-object divide, what does it mean for a human being to have agency? Well, agency, and we've also talked about how willpower is entropic, equilibrium, it runs out. And I think for most of history, we've associated agency with willpower. I believe agency is more expressed by design of environments to which we choose how we create our environments that then creates a space where responses we can't predict can occur, where people will act differently than they would have. There's always this kind of question of, are you free if you're motivated to sit in a chair because you see it, right? Like you're stimulated. So what comes first, the will or the chair, right? Those kind of questions, I think, assume a subject-object divide. And if there is no subject-object divide, we're kind of already misguided in asking that kind of question. It's even if it was the case that seeing the chair makes you sit in it, it's not given that the chair be there.
Okay, so there's something present here about the notion of agency traditionally or modernistically be associated with willpower, whereas what we're moving towards here is something more normative. Agency is the ability to conform and constrain your way of being in relationship with your environment to afford maximal reciprocally opening energetic flow. Um, I'll let Daniel continue here.
There, right? And someone could have put it there and moved it in different locations. So the environment kind of affords possibilities that otherwise would not be there. Furthermore, if there's no subject-object divide, the relationship between what we choose to do and our environment is simultaneous. We are simultaneously being influenced by the stuff around us, and we are simultaneously influencing it. There really isn't a first come, first serve, because the whole argument of determinism is, well, the motivation to move the chair came before your will, therefore you don't have freedom, right? But actually, and this argument I'd have to expand on, but it's simultaneous. We are worked on by objects as we work on objects. And Marcus was making this point, I really appreciated. I often think that economics can be a very important field to study to see.
Okay, so there's more to this video here. I actually made a comment. 55 minutes. Oliver Berkman says rituals are to time as objects are to space. I think it's more like as places are to space. So when life becomes properly dancey, energetic flow, all of life has a sense of place. Let's define place here as a space has a sense of place when it affords a set of, not novel, a set of, it affords danciness, it affords energetic flow, it affords new possibilities, it affords the widening, the expansiveness of both the persons in the space and the world itself through the space. Now, to scale this up to the notion of relationship, right? You're being with a friend has a sense of place, a real friend. It's mutually energizing. We scale this all the way up to theology, religion, Christianity as a whole. This frame of Christianity as a radical shift into the way being that which affords us energetic flow, um, that is massively appealing to me. And I will say something uh, perhaps boastful. I don't think this is any moral merit or indicative of any moral uh, success on my part or wisdom. I think I'm very, we'll see. I think I'm lucky that for me, perhaps out of both adolescent arrogance and naivety or just pure circumstance, the notion of religion as a set of propositions or a set of propositional Kantian code law to um, hoist up, hold up, aggregate, that notion has always been a complete non-starter for me personally. I think I'm lucky to have had that. Um, and so entering into religion was never entering into an algorithmic way of being. I understand that's not the case for many people, understandably, and it's not that I haven't been dominated by all sorts of Kantian codes and other subsets of my life. Just on the whole, the conscious notion of entering into religion was never one of was never one of just following a set of bylaws. But yeah, this framing of entering into energetic flow, I think, is really important here. And I'm actually going to play what I was
The time ago,
referencing.
they're just born a second ago.
So time and energy are strongly tied together because time and energy are the fundamentals of physics, more than space. That's the weird thing, is that if you put first things first, you get second things also. Like what we were suggesting is that the way you get the fullness of energy and time is by working on your space. Whereas when you think in terms of space time, like space is real and time is relevant, but we're actually suggesting that working on your space changes how you experience time and how they unfold, right? Like that space is the conditioning of time. It is the way that you experience time. Now that's a different topic, but we're kind of confused about the relation of space and time, and that's part of the problem. But the point is that as you move to the mechanical clock, stress, all of the stuff you were describing, you get technology, you get
Okay, so that's a good place to stop that. Now, how nice would it be if your house, your office, the places you go most regularly were actually, um, what was the Vervaekian description of normativity? Uh, optimizing, optimally realizing. That is, they enabled and afforded and energized the behaviors that were in most right relationship with reality. Not well said, but if your space is actually designed well and laid out well, it will empower you to behave in a way that is in line with your transcendental's values, i.e., normative. Um, let's see if I can thread this needle here, because I feel that the videos, or this notion of Christianity as energetic shift and this notion of normativity are still feeling pretty disparate. So um, I guess what I'd like to get at is a bit of embarrassingly a personal anecdote. So I've been going to the movies by myself for many years now, pretty regularly since we were allowed to go to the movies post or mid COVID. Um, and I would say at the beginning um, of that period, I noticed that maybe in about 1 in 5 movies, I had to tell someone to be quiet, to stop talking. Not whispering intermittently to a friend, but yapping. Um, and this was, I was doing a lot of sort of traditional Western psychotherapy at the time and working on my assertion and trying to embody the, alleged high disagreeableness I see in my big five. Um, doing this has never been easy for me, telling people to be quiet. And with reps, it's gotten easier. I've learned technique. Um, it's never pleasant to speak up in a movie theater, but the first there were a number of stories that I used to motivate, justify, rationalize my standing up for myself. So, well, standing up for myself is one version of that story. The first story was something like when Jordan was referencing the pharaonic executive state of Moses, was something like, okay, I have a patriarchal duty to enforce the order in my community or my society. This person is not following the rules, which is then causing entropy to the aggregate that is the society that is trying to come together to enjoy a movie. And, I have, whether it be a religious or ethical responsibility as a man to enforce the law. And that didn't really work for me. I mean, it was enough to it was enough to energize me. uh, it was enough of a rationalization that activated my behavior. And for a while, it did its job. And then later, I sort of moved to what I think would be just a sort of very therapy speak um, alternative story, which is something like, oh no, I'm doing this because I'm having this, my spontaneous emotions are telling me I'm irritated, my needs are not met, I'm not being respected as a person, and thus I need to tell this person to be quiet just for myself. It's not embedded in a higher social ethic. It's not embedded in a unspoken social contract. It's just about me honoring my own needs, values, desires. Um, of course, both those things, the previous story and this current story I'm sharing, uh, could be true. Actually, are true. But recently, about a month ago, I was in a movie. So I should say, I said maybe 1 in 5 movies I used to have to tell someone to be quiet. Now it's probably moved up to 3 or 4 in 5 movies. There's also, it used to be like 1 in 10 movies you had to tell someone to put a phone away. Now it's in like 2 of 5 movies you have to tell someone to put a phone away. And it's actually, I noticed, just a side note, it's not, it's usually multiple people who are friends who are sitting together or family. Um, and so recently I told these people to put their phones away. And was um what I noticed was a sense of relief. Now, I could have been projecting this, but I got the sense, I saw they were sitting lower than me, and I saw them put their phones away, it was almost like I saw their bodies relax. And I realized that is what is meant by well, I realized the new story that came to me is, oh, I'm inviting these people back into proper participation. I'm inviting them back into proper participation. I'm inviting them into a reciprocally opening energetic flow. Right. It was almost like they were relieved. Now we can actually participate in watching this movie together with other people in our society. Maybe it's not a community proper. Um, But it occurred to me right at that moment, oh, this is the spirit of the law. This is what's energizing about the law. This is actually this is this has normativity. I'm not just enforcing ethics, my ethics or our unspoken shared ethics. I'm inviting these strangers back into proper participation. And that has really alleviated a lot of my neurosis about speaking up about this stuff. Now, I actually want to pull up another clip that was the whole basis of this video, and I forgot to find it. So I'm going to pause this really quick and find it. Okay, I actually did find it. I did have it up. So this is a conversation. This is technically Dialogo 7, for those of you familiar. It is Guy Sangstock, Christopher Masterpietro, Vervaeke, and Jordan H. And in the context of this video, they're talking about having recently attended Guy has recently attended an AI conference, and the realization is that these people are looking at the predicaments that AI poses to us strictly through the lens of ethics without any real notion of normativity. I mean, that's a very I'm painting very broad strokes here, but let's just play this clip and see where it goes.
About this in our the one conversation we had last Saturday, we were all. It was about like the ripening, like the kairos, maybe what binds the henosis and the kenosis together is the kairos, the ripening, the right timing. Yeah, that's a very good point. That's excellent.
I'll loop us back to the beginning, which is to recognize that there is the implicit normativity of the modality of beauty that acts as both a training regime for a transcendent normativity, or at least transcendent to yourself, and also as an antidote to the denatured normativity that comes from a highly processed diet of lower. Like you can even describe like the basics. Like here's a couple of basics, and you can notice that if you participate, if you're not doing these basics, you will notice in your.
Okay, so there's something about the implicit stroke of beauty that helps to regain a normative frame and fix the broken normativity that comes from being a disembodied brain in a bucket Silicon Valley type of dude, which I've been there, and I have many friends who are there, whom I love. I will continue with this clip. Is there something more to be said about that? Let's see.
Yourself in a very vague but real way, that what you're doing is not as good as when you are participating in these basics. And that's the sacred. In other words, that's the setting apart of one state to another state with a vector that points towards a directionality. And now you're on the way, right? Now you're on a path and you can begin to expand and expand and expand. And again, you're unfolding, you're beginning to notice that this entire modality of normativity of the logos, the way that one relates on the basis of beauty, is real. And I mean, think about how much that explodes a whole lot of underlying assumptions. It removes that sense of exposure. Like this is a very profoundly good prescription.
Yeah, Jordan, you're right. It addresses all of them. It addresses the modal displacement. It addresses the exposure. It addresses identifying this self with soul authorship. It's addressing all of them very, very powerfully, I think.
So, guys, it sounds like you've got a very straightforward project. Just go and start inviting people, inviting lead AI researchers to go hang out for 30 minutes.
I'll feed it into my AI. I'll mark it off in my calendar.
Just have your bot talk to my bot. It's gonna. Yes, but see how funny that is? Because it's so you can say it right. Once again, there's a self-referentiality. This either requires a minimum viable level of courage to be willing to attend to that possibility.
Okay, so I will try to find. There's a little more here. I'm going to find it. Actually, I'm just going to continue this exactly where we left off, more or less.
Well enough to be able to have confidere that what we're saying is plausible enough to meet your minimum viable level of courage, right? Either one of those two can move up higher until you reach a point of inflection, at which point you're now engaging in an action. It's crazy. Like, this is actually very much something like being saved. Like, you are now, once you've moved across that threshold, you are on the way. You are moving in a direction which is categorically life-giving for you and for the world. And every one person in that room ultimately can't help but have that recognition. It is a healthier, stronger basis for being in relationship with the choices that you are tasked with making in the world.
That was the original meaning of the term that has often been translated in the New Testament as inspiration, which then got reduced to God dictating to somebody. The original meaning of inspiration, when it says all Scripture is inspired, is all of it is life giving. It is all life giving, like breathing into somebody. It's that sense.
Mm-hmm.
The life giving.
Okay.
So I mean,
so that's really good. I feel like that kind of threads the needle here, which is Daniel was speaking earlier about spirit being energetic. Here John is talking about scripture being inspired, is meaning all of scripture is life-giving. And when Jordan makes this comparison of taking the tech nerd or whatever into a space of normativity by having them learn to orient in an embodied sense by the stroke of beauty, they're actually being saved, meaning entering into an energetic flow, becoming a follower of the way, or the logos. That's the space of the normative. So I'm going to let John and them continue here. They're going to cover some concerns about bad faith, these sort of cynical responses you would expect from that in our society. And I think that will relate back to the personal anecdote I shared about learning to rebuke properly in the movie theater, learning to rebuke my fellow man properly in a way that is actually invitation to life, an invitation to deeper participation.
what comes to mind then is, so one of the strategies of modernity is refutation by trivializing redescription. And one of the lessons one of the things I've learned, maybe I don't know if it's a lesson or not, from my engagement in the world of social media, is that this is a prevalent strategy. I will redescribe what you've done in a reductive, trivializing way, so that I can dismiss it and not have to engage to it. So, for example, that's what they come to after all of this? Go out into the wilderness a bit? Big deal. We've heard that from the romantics. X, and blah, blah, blah. I know that's not what we're saying, but I just wanted to give us an opportunity to properly respond. I don't know what the right verb is here, to that. That is I think this is back to Chris's incentivization question. It's like, I'm trying to do Tai Chi with this. How do we properly, right? I want to, if possible, reduce or disarm that reflex that people drop in order to not have to engage with anything.
I appreciate your peaceful nature, John. My tendency is to go more like to Hapkido with this and notice that we used to live in a world where belching in public was properly noticed as inappropriate.
Yeah.
And the move that you're describing is identical with belching in public. My experience is that when I see somebody make that move, I feel sad because they have revealed themselves as a bad combination of obdurate, truculent, and remarkably self-centered.
Yes.
Which just leads me to no longer want to meaningfully engage with them, other than the degree to which I feel a certain responsibility to just help human beings as human beings. But if we lived in a proper culture, they would have a friend nearby who would rebuke them for inappropriate relationship with simple reality. And that's maybe the meta problem. So it's something like, I would like to reinstantiate proper social shame, or recognize that it's not random. Like, it exists for a reason. The move that you're describing is a terrible reflex. Like, it's a bad habit. And anybody who begins to participate in a kind of a deeper understanding of A, reality, and B, how these kinds of conversations work, just begins to notice that all you're doing is revealing yourself as not having proper social grace, and therefore self-exiting. Yet you're still hanging around, right? You're still participating. You're still listening, but your way of listening isn't actually using your own time well. Like, what are you doing? So maybe, I'm more of a Hapkido kind of guy than a Tai Chi guy.
Okay. It was a profoundly eloquent way of saying, tell them to go fuck themselves.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's even worse. It's like you were fucking yourself, and you're like making yourself look like a fucking idiot. And anybody who can tell. And the only question now is, are they going to be generous enough to reach across the chasm to invite you back into something?
Okay, so perhaps I just like listening to that clip because it's vindicating of my own my newfound habit of telling people off in movie theaters. But there's an important distinction here between the ethical and the normative, that you can make the exact same rebuke worded the same way, expressed the same way to the same person, friend, or stranger. And if you're doing it in the posture of the ethical posture, meaning you're being something like a lawman and not a proper judge, as referenced in the earlier video, the judge, Moses as the judge who puts norms first above the rules, you can make the exact same rebuke to a friend or stranger, and you will be coming from, what is the wrong spiritual place. In reality, the rebuke should not be something that merely enforces the consensus truth law of what our social norms should be, but the proper rebuke normatively is that which invites the other into proper participation in reality and thus energetic flow. So there's one more video I want to reference here potentially. Let me just double check this. Well, also this notion of being the tourist, I think is particularly relevant here. Like the tourist versus the pilgrim, which is covered much more in this video, and I could talk ad nauseum about the relationship to that and the Hawaiian notion of haole or haole, meaning the person who is not listening versus the person with aloha who is listening. I could go on a whole rant about that, but yeah, the tourist is not actually properly participating in the reality in front of them. But let me move on to what I think will be the last clip in this. One moment. Okay, I think I found it.
I mean, this is why the Neoplatonists and then people like William Desmond on participation as an alternative to modernity's obsession with possession has been also very, very important. That again goes towards seeing God again, right? So think about this. This is Janet Soskis in Naming God. John Locke takes the names of God and turns them into properties that are owned by God as a substance, for which we can then come up with a definition. But before that, you didn't have properties, you had names. And a name is not, that's not what a name is. A name is a baptism into a relationship, a reciprocal relationship of constituting a self, a person, a spirit. So that's what naming is. Naming is, oh, what we're doing is we're bringing you into this reciprocal relationship, this constitutive relationship from which yourself and your personhood and right are going to be born, because you're named by a community, right? And you're named by.
So I'm going to go ahead and speculate here that even sort of the meta or macro laws, when Moses is coming down from Mount Sinai, like even the Ten Commandments, those are almost, in the properly normative perspective, those are something like names. Like if the law, I mean, this is a crazy speculation, and I don't think it. I think again, this is broad strokes, and it's incredibly imprecise. But like the law, proper law, should be ought to be a name, in the sense that John is talking about here. I have not articulated this very well, but let's continue to listen.
Community, and so right, and that's how naming works. So we lost the relationship of the sacred as
what we're doing is we're trying to name something so that we can reciprocally open with it. And then we are returning to possessing like definitions that we can manipulate with respect to it. And that would be like if you tried to do that equivalently with other phenomena that you admit exist, like for example, you as a person. See, the thing about a name does is it picks out that there's a non-categorical presence to you. Like you, guy qua guy belongs to no category because he's just guy, right? But it's like it's like I'm touching you with the name, and so there's that suchness. But
Okay, well, the stream is not buffering nicely, and I feel like if I follow this particular train of thought, it will go off the rails and it will not be properly inspired, spirit-filled, and life-giving. I'm gonna check if there's maybe one more clip from this video. Okay, yes. So I've concluded that if I go any further with this, it will just go off the rails and not be life-giving. So in conclusion, what was this? This was a shitty video, but if there's anything like cohesion, coherence, um, legibility, gestalt, anything emerging for anyone, please leave a comment or reach out to me or um, yeah, email me or something, like, comment, subscribe. That's what's been percolating in my head this past week. The relationship between Christianity as energetic flow, normativity as the having normativity as the proper perspective taking to enable full right relationship with reality. The differentiation between the law and the spirit of law, that being that which is most life-giving, the relationship between place, space, dance, energetic flow. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I will probably regret all of this, but thanks for listening. Leave a comment.